Hey everyone, Marcus Philly here with Functional Bodybuilding, and today I'm sharing my top 7 FBB moves that I can't live without. One thing I've always emphasized in any of my functional bodybuilding programs is something I call balance. See, that way you build strength and muscle, but you never overtax any one area of your body. Now, a classic bodybuilding program might follow a template of leg day, chest day, and so on, but with functional bodybuilding, we think of it in terms of movement patterns, like hinging, rotating, core, push, pull, and squat. So I went ahead and I pulled 7 moves from 7 different movement patterns. But with these movements, and these 7 specific movements, we're gonna show you how you can emphasize one pattern, one movement pattern, but at the same time, you're gonna bring in some other elements as well, such as building stability in your movement through where the load is placed, or they add a secondary movement pattern that you can use to strengthen and double up your gains all in one exercise. So let's take a look, and I'll show you some tips and tricks along the way that will help you bring these right into your training immediately. All right, we're starting off with the slide board body saw. I love this exercise because it's one of the most potent core anterior abdominal exercises that we have in functional bodybuilding. It utilizes a principle of isometric contraction, which we value a lot at functional bodybuilding, on top of some subtle movement. See, many people are often doing exercises, they're concerned about getting more reps in, flexing, contracting, extending. I love isometric exercises because of their power and the amount of connection that you can make with your brain into muscle tissue. But as much as I love incorporating isometrics, it's also good to have some subtle dynamic contractions in there as well. This incorporates both. That subtle contraction, opening and closing of the shoulder joint, is adding intensity, removing intensity. It's this pulsing of intensity on your abdominals as you go back and forth in this exercise. One thing you really want to work on is keeping a very straight body. From shoulder through hip through ankle, the body should stay completely level. A common fault we see is when people pike their hips up. It takes a little practice getting used to. Have somebody watch you, give you some visual cues or some tactile cues to keep your hips down. But this exercise is absolutely money. All right, the next exercise is a vertical pressing exercise with an isometric hold in one of the non-working arms. It's called the Philly press. Essentially, you're holding a kettlebell rack position in one arm, and then in the other arm, you're performing a single arm dumbbell Arnold press, named after Arnold Schwarzenegger, who popularized that back in the 80s when he was a bodybuilding champion. Now, I love this exercise because that rotation of the dumbbell in the working arm really enhances the range of motion. It gets you to extend the range of motion, build some rotation into that arm. And for me, it's always helped me keep healthy, strong shoulders. In the other arm, I always love to have something, as I said before, incorporating isometric contractions. Holding that kettlebell in that rack position was a great way to build in some scapular endurance, getting the back of the shoulder to really have to work hard to hold position. So we're working a dynamic contraction in one hand, and in the other hand, we're working an isometric, which is helping to build our shoulder muscles in a different type of way than the actual dynamic pressing. One question I get often is, hey Marcus, do the weights have to be the same in either arm? And the answer is absolutely not. I like to aim for something roughly the same in each arm, but because kettlebells come in different weights, you can level up the weight or regress it down, scale it down, depending on what you feel comfortable doing. A very common fault that I see in this really comes down to the rack position. As you can see, a correct rack position is when the wrist is straight, the forearm and the elbow are tucked down against the ribs, and the shoulder blade is also packed down. The common fault is when people often lift their elbow up really high. That lifting of the elbow takes the work off of the shoulder blade and the scapular girdle, where we really want you to be building great muscle endurance and strength. All right, the third exercise is called the cross body carry. We use tons of carries in functional bodybuilding because I love having some locomotion with loaded carries on the shoulders and overhead. What this does is it's going to get you to coordinate moving with having to brace in your midline and with your shoulders and with other parts of your trunk and your hips. The crossbody carry I love because it incorporates putting a load down underneath your shoulder, which is going to impact your shoulder blade and your traps in one way, while you're also supporting a load in the other arm overhead. You can actually, switch arms in between sets or within the same set, and that way you can balance out each side of your body and you can work these positions on both sides evenly. Carries are awesome exercises to actually mix in with a conditioning piece, and you'll often find them in functional bodybuilding workouts where we're doing that in a combination of other loaded exercises, gymnastics, and cyclical cardio like a rowing machine or a stationary bike. Now I've got a little bit of a tip for you. Watch me do this carefully. How do you get the kettlebell into position this way? And essentially you sort of straddle the two kettlebells so that when you bring them up to your waist, one moves directly into a kettlebell clean. You are going to be limited by how effective and efficient you are at getting kettlebells into the rack position, but if you watch this demonstration of how I'm getting it over my head and I'm also bringing it back down, you'll be a little bit better off. All right, the fourth exercise is the Cyclist 1 1/4 squat. I'm showing it here in a variety of different ways: body weight, goblet, hands clasped behind my back. See, what a Cyclist squat gives you as an advantage over a flat-footed squat is that so many of us are limited in our range of motion in our squat by our ankles. A slant board or this Cyclist squat position is really going to allow you to dive deeper into your squat, which is going to give you a lot more training benefit on the posterior chain, glutes, adductors, hips, as well as quads. It can also help you over time build some ankle range too, so that when you do flat-footed squatting on the ground, you can actually get better depth. Lastly, this Cyclist position with the heels elevated is going to put a tremendous amount of load onto the quads, and it will also strengthen the knees a lot. Now, this is important that you don't overshoot your ability to begin with. At first, it might feel like a lot of load on your knees, so start body weight, then gradually build up to a goblet where you're holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell over the chest, and then over time you can work up to barbell back squats and front squats in this same Cyclist position. The last thing I'll say is that the quarter squat addition to this exercise is something that I love, and it's also a type of range of motion enhancement that I bring to a lot of different exercises. What it does is that in a single exercise or a single repetition of the exercise, you're going to go through a full range on the way down, come up about a quarter to a halfway, return to the bottom, and then explode back up to the top. That extra quarter repetition range of motion is just going to add to the total time that you're under tension on your legs. We're increasing range of motion, increasing time under tension, which is one of our ways of intensifying these exercises for you. All right, coming up next, we're working on a horizontal pressing exercise. We already hit a vertical pressing exercise earlier with the Philly press. Now we're looking at the glute bridge kettlebell chest press. There's a few things about this exercise that I do like. In particular, it's this combination of a posterior chain isometric, so the glute bridge that you're performing on the bench, which is going to activate hamstrings, glutes, and your low back muscles, which is now being combined with a horizontal chest press. See, that combination of two different movement patterns within a single exercise, which I mentioned earlier we would be discussing, is something that we like to bring into functional bodybuilding exercises. It's going to demand a little bit more out of you, and these two movement patterns are complementary. They're not taxing each other, so they go really well when you're actually doing this glute bridge chest press. Now, getting into position for this exercise is something that a lot of people struggle with. One little hack that I've discovered along the way is if you slide a small box right next to the bench that is about 6 to 8 inches lower than the height of the bench, or even a medicine ball can be done the same exact way. You sit on that medicine ball or you sit on that box. That's going to make bridging your hips up and leaning your shoulders back onto the bench much safer and much easier to get into position. This exercise is done with kettlebells, as you're seeing here, but it could easily be done with dumbbells. The one thing I like about kettlebells for this particular exercise is the way they sit on the forearms and the way that they actually put a little bit more load on the triceps when you're pressing. You can go give it a try yourself and just feel out what the differences are. Lastly, There is a version of this where you alternate arms right to left from the top down. That's also a great exercise because it is incorporating a topic I've already talked about, which is holding isometrics while doing dynamic contractions on the other side of your body. Again, this is just making it more of a unilateral exercise and adding more time under tension while you're holding that isometric contraction. All right, moving on to the upper body pulling. We're gonna look at lean away ring pull-ups. Now, the difference between using rings or a pull-up bar simply comes down to the freedom of range of motion that you have with those rings. Rings are going to be able to twist and turn to sort of conform to your body's optimal position, how your shoulders maybe feel the strongest or they feel the best. I'm not saying that I don't like pull-ups on the pull-up bar. However, rings have a special characteristic, and that is it. Now, the strict lean away pull-up is something that is particularly effective at helping to build the shoulder blade and the subscapularis muscles. Now, you might not know what those muscles are, and you might not even care. And you can continue to do regular strict pull-ups, but as a variation that you should bring into your training or consider bringing into your training, try these lean away pull-ups. And essentially you're just performing a regular strict pull-up to the top, and on the eccentric or the negative portion of the repetition, you're gonna try and lean as far away as you can. Now, if you've ever seen somebody do a front lever on the rings or the bar, it's a really skilled gymnastics or calisthenics movement. And what it requires is the strength that you can build in part through a lean away negative on this type of pull-up. Additionally, as you get stronger in this movement, you can keep your legs out in front of you further, kind of creating that full straight body position while you lean away, which is going to incorporate your abdominals into the exercise as well as your upper back. Now I'm showing you a couple different variations, ways to regress this movement because the lean away pull-up on the rings is a challenging one. So you can start by just doing negatives only, where you jump up to the top of the rings and you're just performing that lean away on the way down. Then repeat, jump up to the top, lean away on the way down. Another option that you can have is the feet on the floor assisted ring lean away pull-up. So essentially, you're going to set the rings to about shoulder height when you're standing on the floor right underneath them. And then, as you can see, I'm pulling myself up using the assistance of my legs. And then on the lean away portion, I'm trying to support as much of my body weight with my arms and my upper back as possible and not my legs. This is a great way to get into this exercise and something I stumbled upon just filming this video so that I could show you a way to regress this down even if you don't have strict pull-ups yet. All right, last but not least, we're going to show you a hinging exercise today, and that is going to come in the form of the deficit landmine single leg RDL. This exercise brings together some of the things that I love about functional bodybuilding. Number one, a focus and a principal emphasis on single leg or unilateral training. See, when you squat on two legs or when you press with two arms, you will always have some imbalance underlying that press, which will be covered up by the fact that you're doing the exercise on both sides. So using single leg training like in the single leg RDL, you're going to really be able to highlight individual weaknesses between right and left and help bring them into balance. The next thing I love about this exercise is that it's using a bit of stability in the form of the loading implement. The landmine attachment is something I absolutely love in training because in certain exercises like the single leg RDL, where stability and balance can oftentimes limit individuals from being able to train correctly, the landmine provides just enough stability to allow you to balance better through the range of motion and get great unilateral training. See, people often assume that if it's functional training, it means you can't be using stability in the form of a machine or in the form of a landmine. But the key here is that the right amount of stability is going to give you access to training movement patterns that will ultimately lead to giving you more strength, balance, and ability to control your body through space, which would possibly be more functional for you in life. A couple things to keep in mind on this specific exercise. As we're performing RDLs, I like to think about trying to keep my knee either directly over or slightly behind my ankle. If you do that, you will really put the emphasis on the right parts of that leg. Secondly, you're seeing me perform this at a deficit. And if that deficit is too aggressive for you, remember, you can always regress down to a smaller deficit. That's just going to decrease the range of motion. I only really want you going through a range of motion where you can keep your back really flat and hinge just at the waist. Lastly, because you're hanging on to the end of a barbell where the collar is a little bit thick, you might find that your grip starts to give out before your lower body actually gets the right stimulus. So using a lifting strap on an exercise like the Landmine RDL is a good idea. It's going to make sure your grip doesn't fatigue out before you get a great hamstring and glute stimulus out of this exercise. All right, so if you're wondering how you can take all of these and put them into your training today, one thing we love to do in functional bodybuilding is strength supersets. So what I have up here on the screen for you are 3 different supersets that combine these exercises into complementary movement patterns that you can go into the gym and try today. Okay, now it's your turn. Go give these movements a try. Drop your questions in the comments below, and be sure to check out my Persist program where you can see how we put all these movements together in complete training progressions with warm-ups, strength and conditioning, and more. So the link is in the description below. I'll see you there. Catch you next time.